In the 1950s, America had 30 cookies. Cookies that were part of American tables, sand tarts, and pfeffernusse appeared in every event across the country. These penny recipes became the heart of every cookie jar. Then something changed. One by one, they disappeared from recipe boxes, cookie exchanges, and kitchen counters. Today, most Americans have no idea these penny cookies ever existed. These are the 30 lost 1950s cookbook cookies that cost pennies to make. Forgotten cookies earned their name from the unusual baking method that required forgetting them overnight. These meringue cookies cost 3 pennies per batch in 1955 and used only egg whites, sugar, and vanilla. Housewives preheated ovens to 350 degrees, turned them off completely, then placed cookie sheets inside and left them overnight. The residual heat slowly dried meringues into crispy clouds by morning. Depression-era mothers made these when butter and flour ran low because egg whites from other recipes would otherwise get thrown away. 2 egg whites produced 4 dozen cookies that cost less than a nickel total. Children woke to find cookies waiting on cooling racks. The overnight method meant no watching ovens or setting timers. Families called them angel kisses or meringue drops, depending on region. Church ladies brought them to potlucks in decorative tins. Wedding receptions served them alongside punch. The cookies are stored for months without losing texture. By 1985, nobody had patience to wait 8 hours for cookies when Chips Ahoy took 30 seconds to open. The recipe vanished when convenience replaced creativity, and Americans forgot that dessert once required planning ahead instead of instant gratification. Rolling dough paper thin created sand tarts that melted on tongues like beach sand dissolving. These delicate cookies cost 5 pennies per batch and required butter, sugar, flour, and cinnamon. German immigrants brought the recipe to Pennsylvania in the 1800s, but 1950s housewives perfected the technique through generations of practice. The dough rolled so thin it became translucent before cutting into shapes with cookie cutters. Each cookie measured barely thicker than paper and snapped when broken in half. Cinnamon sugar sprinkled across tops before baking added sweetness, without expensive ingredients or complicated frostings. One batch produced 100 cookies that were stored for weeks in metal tins without softening. Children competed to see who could eat them slowest as they dissolved on tongues. Christmas cookie exchanges always featured them decorated with colored sugar and almond halves pressed into centers. Grandmothers taught granddaughters the proper rolling technique that took years to master. The cookies traveled well without crumbling and lasted through holiday seasons. By 1975, nobody rolled dough that thin when store-bought wafers cost less than the effort required, and patience became a luxury nobody could afford in modern kitchens. Spicy German pfeffernusse cookies packed more pepper than most Americans expected in desserts. These tiny spice balls cost 4 pennies per batch and combined black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, molasses, and flour into dough that aged better over time. German housewives made them 6 weeks before Christmas and stored them in tins where flavors deepened and mellowed. Each cookie measured 1 inch across and contained enough spice to make noses tingle. The pepper provided warmth without heat and balanced sweet molasses perfectly. Children dunked them in milk or hot cocoa to soften the dense texture. Adults ate them with coffee during afternoon breaks. The recipe required no eggs or butter, making them affordable during lean times when other cookies demanded expensive ingredients. One batch produced 200 cookies that lasted through entire winter seasons without spoiling. Families traded them with neighbors during holiday visits. The aging process transformed harsh spices into complex flavors that improved weekly. By 1980, black pepper in cookies seemed strange to Americans who preferred chocolate chips and sugar, and the tradition of aging cookies 6 weeks before eating became impractical when instant gratification dominated. The recipe disappeared when spice cookies fell from favor, and nobody remembered that pepper once belonged in desserts.
Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video.
Greek butter cookies, called kourabietes, arrived in American cookbooks through immigrant families sharing traditions. These crescent-shaped cookies cost 8 pennies per batch and used butter, powdered sugar, flour, and almonds. Greek grandmothers made them for weddings, baptisms, and Easter celebrations, where they symbolized good fortune and prosperity. The dough required beating butter until fluffy and white before adding other ingredients. Each cookie shaped into crescents or balls and baked until barely golden. While still warm, they rolled in powdered sugar that created thick white coating. The butter content made them rich and tender, melting on tongues without chewing. Almond extract provided subtle flavor that distinguished them from plain butter cookies. Rose water added in some families created floral notes that polarized eaters. One batch produced 60 cookies that stored for weeks when kept airtight. Greek-American families served them at every celebration alongside other traditional sweets. Church festivals featured them sold by the dozen to raise funds. By 1985, butter cookies seemed too plain when elaborate decorated cookies dominated bakery windows and the Greek tradition became niche rather than mainstream American baking. Australian Anzac biscuits crossed oceans during World War I and landed in American cookbooks by the 1950s. These oat cookies cost 6 pennies per batch and contained golden syrup, oats, coconut, flour, and butter. Australian wives created them because the ingredients didn't spoil during long ship journeys to soldiers overseas. The golden syrup provided sweetness and moisture that kept cookies fresh for months. Rolled oats and coconut added texture and nutrition that sustained soldiers between meals. Each cookie baked hard and crunchy, designed to survive rough handling in military supply chains. American housewives adapted the recipe during wartime rationing, when traditional cookie ingredients became scarce. The cookies required no eggs, making them practical when chickens stopped laying or eggs cost too much. One batch produced 4 dozen cookies that traveled well in care packages. Veterans brought the recipe home and continued making them for nostalgic reasons. Children ate them dunked in milk to soften the hard texture. By 1975, golden syrup became difficult to find in American stores, and the recipe faded as veterans aged and younger generations never learned the wartime tradition. 5-penny cookies down, 25 more forgotten. Number 8 hides in refrigerators for weeks. Number 11 contains sour cream nobody expects. Number 15 costs pennies but tastes like expensive bakery confections that once required skilled bakers. Soft ginger cookies topped with cream cheese frosting created ginger creams that combined spice and tang. These cookies cost 7 pennies per batch and mixed ginger, molasses, cinnamon, flour, and butter into soft dough. Unlike crispy ginger snaps, these baked into cake-like cookies that stayed soft for days. The cream cheese frosting spread across cooled cookies added richness that balanced spicy ginger perfectly. Housewives made them for church socials where they disappeared first from cookie platters. The soft texture appealed to people who disliked hard ginger snaps that broke teeth. Molasses provided deep flavor and dark color that made cookies look richer than their penny cost suggested. One batch produced 3 dozen frosted cookies that stored well when kept covered. Children requested them for school lunches instead of plain cookies. The frosting required cream cheese, butter, powdered sugar, and vanilla beaten until fluffy. Winter holidays featured them alongside other spice cookies in decorative tins. Families wrapped them individually in wax paper for gift-giving. By 1980, soft cookies with frosting seemed too labor-intensive when packaged soft-batch cookies promised convenience and cream cheese frosting became cake territory instead of cookie topping. Swirled chocolate and vanilla dough created refrigerator pinwheels that impressed guests with minimal effort. These cookies cost 9 pennies per batch because chocolate increased expenses slightly. Housewives divided basic sugar cookie dough in half, added cocoa to one portion, then rolled both into rectangles. The vanilla rectangles stacked on chocolate, rolled into logs, and chilled overnight until firm. Slicing revealed spiral patterns that looked bakery professional despite simple technique. Each cookie measured half-inch thick, with perfect swirls that never mixed or blurred. The chocolate and vanilla combination satisfied every preference without baking 2 separate batches. One log produced 40 cookies that were sliced and baked in 10 minutes when guests arrived. Children watched with fascination as plain logs transformed into patterned cookies. Holiday cookie platters featured them for visual variety among plain rounds. The make-ahead aspect meant cookie dough always waited ready in refrigerators. Teenage daughters learned the rolling technique that required patience and gentle hands. By 1985, slice and bake refrigerated dough tubes with pre-made patterns eliminated the need for homemade pinwheels, and the satisfaction of creating swirls by hand became unnecessary nostalgia. Spice cookies packed with raisins became hermits that lasted so long they earned their solitary name. These cookies cost 5 pennies per batch and combined molasses, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, flour, and raisins into thick dough. The name came from how long they lasted. Like hermits living alone, these cookies survived months in cool pantries without spoiling. Each cookie measured 3 inches across, with cake-like texture between cookie and cake. The spice combination masked cheap ingredients and provided complexity that improved over days. Raisins added chewiness and natural sweetness that reduced sugar needs. One batch produced 4 dozen cookies that fed families through lean weeks. Depression mothers made them when flour quality dropped because spices disguised everything. School lunchboxes carried them wrapped in cloth napkins. Factory workers ate them during breaks. The cookies required no decoration or frosting. The dark color and rustic appearance signaled homemade authenticity. Families stored them in cookie jars, where they softened slightly and became even better. By 1985, spice cookies became old-fashioned relics that grandmothers made while chocolate chip cookies dominated every kitchen, and Americans forgot molasses once flavored everyday cookies instead of just gingerbread. Spirals of date filling inside sugar cookie dough created date pinwheel cookies that sliced into beautiful rounds. These cookies cost 12 pennies per batch because dates cost more than other dried fruits. Housewives cooked chopped dates with sugar and water until thick paste formed, cooled it, then spread it across rolled cookie dough. The dough rolled around, filling into logs that chilled overnight before slicing. Each slice revealed brown date spirals encased in golden cookies that baked into crispy, chewy combinations. Dates provided natural sweetness and sticky texture that held spirals together. The cookies looked fancy enough for guests, despite simple ingredients and techniques. One batch produced 5 dozen cookies that impressed at holiday gatherings. Children helped roll logs and watched dates disappear inside dough. Christmas cookie exchanges featured them as premium offerings because dates cost more. The make-ahead nature meant dough logs waited in refrigerators for weeks. Tangy sour cream replaced butter in these soft cookies that stayed moist for weeks. Sour cream cookies cost 6 pennies per batch. Nutmeg added warmth without overwhelming the delicate sour cream flavor. Housewives made these when butter became expensive or unavailable because sour cream cost less. The cookies required no creaming or special techniques, just mix and drop. One batch produced 6 dozen cookies that stored well in covered containers. Children ate them plain, without complaining about the lack of chocolate. The soft texture meant toddlers and elderly people with dental issues could eat them comfortably. School bake sales featured them sold by the half dozen. The cookies frosted well with simple powdered sugar glaze when occasions demanded decoration. By 1980, sour cream in cookies seemed strange to generations raised on butter, and nobody understood why cookies needed tanginess when sweetness dominated every other option and convenience replaced creativity in American kitchens. 10-penny cookies revealed, 20 more waiting. The next batch costs under a dime per dozen. Number 13 requires cookie presses nobody owns. Number 17 uses breakfast cereal as the main ingredient. Number 20 combines nuts with icebox techniques. Homemade vanilla wafers required patience, but cost 7 pennies compared to store versions. These thin, crispy cookies needed butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and flour mixed into stiff dough that rolled paper thin. Housewives used rolling pins to flatten dough until nearly transparent, before cutting small rounds with biscuit cutters or overturned glasses. Each cookie baked in 6 minutes at high heat, emerging golden and crisp. The vanilla flavor intensified during baking, filling kitchens with sweet aroma that announced cookies to entire neighborhoods. Store-bought Nilla wafers cost 15 cents per box in 1955, making homemade versions significant savings for budget-conscious families. One batch produced 8 dozen cookies that were stored for months in airtight tins without softening. Children ate them plain, crushed them for pie crusts, or layered them with pudding for banana pudding desserts. The thin texture meant they dissolved quickly in mouths, appealing to people who disliked thick, chewy cookies. School lunches included them wrapped in wax paper alongside sandwiches. Grandmothers kept cookie jars filled constantly because they disappeared quickly. The rolling technique required practice. Too thick meant cake-like texture. Too thin meant burned edges. Teenagers learned proper thickness through trial and error over summer vacations. Church bake sales sold them by the tin. By 1980, nobody rolled dough that thin, when Nabisco wafers cost pennies and tasted identical to homemade versions. The recipe disappeared when convenience eliminated the need for Saturday afternoon cookie-making sessions, and Americans forgot that store-bought once meant luxury, while homemade meant economy. Brown sugar instead of white created drops with caramel flavor nobody expected from simple cookies. These cost 4 pennies per batch, using brown sugar, shortening, eggs, vanilla, flour, and baking soda stirred in single bowls. The molasses naturally present in brown sugar kept cookies soft for days, unlike white sugar versions that hardened overnight. Dropped by spoonfuls onto greased sheets, they spread into flat circles with crispy edges and chewy centers. No creaming butter, no chilling dough, no complicated steps. Just mix and bake in 12 minutes. One batch produced 70 cookies that lasted through school weeks packed in metal lunchboxes. Factory workers traded them during coffee breaks. Office secretaries kept desk drawers stocked for afternoon slumps. The simplicity meant children as young as 8 made them independently without supervision or disasters. Brown sugar cost 2 cents less per pound than refined white, making these truly economical choices during tight weeks. The cookies required no decoration. Their caramel color and rustic appearance signaled homemade authenticity that guests appreciated. Housewives doubled recipes routinely and froze half for emergencies when unexpected visitors arrived expecting hospitality. Neighbors traded them over backyard fences along with gossip. Christmas cookie exchanges included them as everyday comfort rather than fancy showpieces. By 1990, chocolate chips dominated every cookie, and plain brown sugar seemed boring when Toll House promised chocolate in every bite, and nobody remembered that simple once meant better. Breakfast cereal became dessert when cornflakes replaced flour in these crispy cookies. Cornflake cookies cost 5 pennies per batch, and mixed crushed cornflakes with butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, and just enough flour to hold everything together. The cereal provided crunch without expensive nuts and stretched cookie dough further than traditional recipes. Each cookie spread thin during baking, creating lacy edges with concentrated cornflake centers. Depression mothers invented these when flour supplies ran low, but cereal boxes remained full from government commodities programs. One batch produced 6 dozen cookies that cost less than plain sugar cookies, despite tasting richer and more interesting. Children loved them because they tasted like eating cereal with sugar without milk's messiness. The cookies required no special equipment or techniques, just crushing cornflakes in bags with rolling pins, then stirring everything together. School fundraisers featured them sold by the dozen wrapped in wax paper. Church potlucks served them alongside fancier cookies, where they disappeared first from platters. The recipe worked with any corn cereal. Generic brands, store brands, or name brands produced identical results. Housewives made them Monday mornings using weekend leftover cereal that went stale. Teenage daughters packed them for school dances. By 1975, using cereal in cookies seemed strange when flour cost pennies, and Americans forgot that Depression creativity once transformed breakfast into dessert, and scarcity drove innovation that abundance eliminated completely. Unlike chewy oatmeal cookies, Crispies baked into thin wafers that snapped when broken. These cost 6 pennies per batch, and combined oats, brown sugar, butter, eggs, vanilla, flour, and baking soda, beaten until smooth. The key difference came from adding extra butter and baking at higher temperatures, creating cookies that spread paper thin and crisped completely through. Each cookie measured 4 inches across, with lacy texture throughout. No soft centers remained. The brown sugar caramelized during baking, producing a toffee-like flavor that elevated simple oats into sophisticated treats. Housewives served them with afternoon tea or coffee, where their delicate nature impressed guests expecting ordinary cookies. One batch produced 5 dozen cookies that were stored for weeks without losing crispness if kept airtight. Children dunked them in milk where they softened slightly before eating. The thin texture meant more cookies per batch, stretching ingredients further during tight budgets. Rolling oats provided fiber and heartiness that made cookies feel substantial despite fragile appearance. School bake sales featured them as premium offerings because appearance suggested bakery quality. Grandmothers taught proper spreading technique that required experience. Too much butter meant greasy puddles. Too little meant thick, disappointing rounds. Christmas cookie platters included them for textural variety among chewy options. By 1985, crispy cookies became unpopular when soft batch everything dominated preferences and Americans decided cookies should stay chewy forever instead of providing crunch. Refrigerator logs, studded with pecans, created cookies that sliced into perfect rounds with visible nuts. Pecan icebox cookies cost 10 pennies per batch because pecans increased expenses, but the convenience justified costs. Butter, brown sugar, eggs, vanilla, flour, and chopped pecans mixed into dough that are shaped into logs and chilled overnight. Slicing cold logs revealed pecan pieces distributed throughout, creating professional appearance with minimal effort. Each cookie baked in 8 minutes, emerging golden with toasted pecan flavor intensified by heat. The make-ahead aspect revolutionized home baking, because dough logs waited ready for unexpected guests or sudden cravings. One log produced 50 cookies that sliced and baked faster than mixing new batches from scratch. And housewives maintained multiple logs in various flavors, rotating through pecan, vanilla, chocolate, and spice versions that prevented cookie monotony. Children never knew what flavor would emerge from refrigerators when cookie requests arose. The pecans provided a luxury feeling despite the overall low cost. 10 pennies bought dessert sophistication that impressed guests. Holiday cookie exchanges featured them as premium offerings where appearance and taste exceeded effort expended. Teenage daughters learned log-shaping techniques that required proper firmness. Too soft meant squished slices. Too hard meant crumbling disasters. Wedding receptions served them alongside fancy bakery cookies. By 1980, Pillsbury refrigerated dough tubes eliminated homemade logs, and pecans became expensive additions nobody wanted to chop when chocolate chips required zero preparation. 15 penny cookies uncovered, 15 more remain. The next group includes lemon, molasses, and meringue variations. Number 18 presses dough through cookie guns. Number 19 melts in its mouth before chewing begins. Number 23 requires no baking whatsoever. Powdered sugar coating created a snowflake appearance on crackled lemon cookie tops. Lemon snowflakes cost 8 pennies per batch and combined butter, sugar, eggs, lemon juice, lemon zest, flour, and baking powder into soft dough. The dough rolled into walnut-sized balls, rolled in powdered sugar twice for thick coating, then baked until the tops cracked open, revealing lemon-yellow centers beneath white surfaces. Fresh lemon juice and zest provided an intense citrus flavor that cut through sweetness perfectly. Each cookie measured 2 inches across, with a dramatic appearance that suggested complicated techniques despite simple preparation. Housewives made them for spring gatherings when winter cookies felt too heavy and summer fruits hadn't arrived yet. One batch produced 4 dozen cookies that stored well in covered containers where powdered sugar coating stayed intact. Children grabbed them, leaving powdered sugar fingerprints on everything they touched afterward. The lemon flavor refreshed palates between richer cookies at holiday exchanges. School bake sales featured them as premium offerings because appearance exceeded ingredients cost. The crackled tops required proper oven temperature. Too hot meant burning. Too cool meant no cracks forming. Grandmothers taught the double rolling technique in powdered sugar that created a thick enough coating to survive baking. Wedding showers served them on doily-lined platters. By 1985, lemon in cookies seemed too tart, when chocolate dominated every preference, and the double rolling seemed excessive when simpler cookies required less effort. True ginger snaps snapped when broken, distinguishing them from soft imposters, calling themselves ginger snaps. Molasses snaps cost 4 pennies per batch and required molasses, brown sugar, shortening, eggs, flour, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves mixed into stiff dough. The dough rolled into marble-sized balls, rolled in granulated sugar, then baked until tops cracked and cookies hardened completely. Each cookie measured 2 inches across and broke with an audible snap when bent, proving proper texture. The molasses provided iron-rich sweetness and dark color that signaled serious cookies for serious cookie eaters. Children dunked them in milk to soften before eating, creating rituals around cookie consumption. One batch produced 100 cookies that lasted months without softening if stored properly in tins. Factory lunchboxes carried them wrapped in cloth napkins. Soldiers received them in care packages because they survived shipping without crumbling. The spice combination provided warmth without excessive heat, appealing to people who avoided overly spiced foods. Grandmothers kept cookie jars filled constantly, refilling weekly as families consumed them steadily. The sugar rolling created a sparkly coating that added texture contrast. School fundraisers sold them by the dozen. By 1980, hard cookies became unpopular when Americans decided cookies should stay soft forever, and the satisfaction of hearing cookies snap became a forgotten pleasure nobody missed. Cookie presses created decorative shapes that made spritz cookies look bakery professional despite home origins. These cost 9 pennies per batch, including butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, almond extract, and flour, mixed until smooth enough to press through metal cookie guns. Scandinavian immigrants brought the tradition to America, where it became a Christmas staple in households with Scandinavian heritage. One batch produced 8 dozen cookies in shapes that varied depending on the disc used. Children fought over who pressed cookies, turning baking into a competitive activity. Holiday cookie platters featured them arranged by shape in rainbow patterns when colored with food dye. The cookies required no decoration beyond their pressed shapes, saving time during busy seasons. By 1980, cookie presses collected dust in cabinets when simpler cookies required no special equipment, and younger generations never learned pressing techniques their grandmothers mastered. Scottish shortbread required only 3 ingredients, but demanded proper technique for success. Shortbread cost 7 pennies per batch, using butter, sugar, and flour in precise ratios that created crumbly, tender cookies. Creaming butter with sugar until fluffy took arm strength before electric mixers existed. The flour folded in gently to avoid developing gluten that would toughen cookies. Each cookie cut while warm into wedges or fingers that cooled into buttery perfection. One batch produced 2 dozen cookies that were stored for weeks in tins. By 1975, butter costs increased, and 3-ingredient cookies seemed too plain when elaborate decorated cookies dominated bakery windows and Americans forgot that simplicity once meant elegance. Egg whites and shredded coconut created macaroons that required no flour whatsoever. Coconut macaroons cost 8 pennies per batch, using egg whites, sugar, vanilla, and shredded coconut mixed into sticky paste. The mixture is dropped by spoonfuls onto parchment paper and baked until golden, with crispy exteriors and chewy interiors. Each macaroon measured 2 inches across and contained enough coconut to satisfy tropical cravings. Housewives made these when leftover egg whites from other recipes threatened to waste. 2 egg whites produced 3 dozen macaroons that cost pennies and lasted weeks when stored airtight. The lack of flour meant they naturally avoided gluten before anyone cared about gluten-free diets. Jewish families made them for Passover, when flour restrictions applied. The coconut provided texture and flavor that needed no embellishment. Children grabbed them straight from cooling racks. Holiday cookie exchanges featured them as unique offerings among flour-based competition. Some families dipped bottoms in melted chocolate for extra luxury, increasing costs to 12 pennies, but creating bakery-quality confections. The cookies required no special equipment or techniques, just stirring and dropping. School bake sales featured them as premium coconut treats. By 1985, coconut fell from favor when younger generations associated it with old-fashioned desserts and tropical flavors became passé when chocolate dominated every preference completely. Rolling pins transformed simple dough into canvas for creativity, when rolled sugar cookies dominated every holiday season and special celebration across America. These cost 6 pennies per batch, using butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, flour, and baking powder mixed into firm dough that chilled before rolling. Housewives rolled dough 1/4 inch thick across heavily floured surfaces, achieving uniform thickness that ensured even baking without burned edges or raw centers. Cookie cutters in shapes ranging from simple circles to elaborate Christmas trees pressed through dough, creating decorative cookies that delighted children and impressed guests. Each cookie baked 8 minutes at 375 degrees. One batch produced 5 dozen cookies depending on cutter size. Smaller shapes yielded more cookies. Larger shapes created impressive centerpieces for holiday tables. Grandmothers owned tin collections of cutters accumulated over decades, each shape carrying memories of previous cookie batches and family gatherings where these cookies appeared. The decorating process transformed baking into art projects, where even young children participated by sprinkling colored sugar across wet icing or placing silver dragées on frosted surfaces. School parties featured them decorated with classroom themes: pumpkins for Halloween, hearts for Valentine's Day, flags for patriotic holidays that required red, white, and blue color schemes. Church fundraisers sold them by the dozen, decorated elaborately to justify premium pricing that funded youth programs and building maintenance projects. Wedding showers served them on tiered platters decorated in bride-chosen color schemes that matched invitations and napkins perfectly. The cookies required significant time investment: mixing, chilling, rolling, cutting, baking, cooling, decorating, but results justified effort through visual appeal and customization possibilities that made each batch unique. Holiday cookie exchanges valued them as premium contributions because decoration demonstrated care and skill beyond simple drop cookies anyone could make without thinking. Spicy molasses cookies that actually snapped became ginger snaps that defined proper cookie texture for entire generations of serious cookie eaters. These cost 4 pennies per batch, combining molasses, brown sugar, shortening, eggs, flour, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and baking soda into stiff aromatic dough that filled kitchens with spice smells during mixing. The spice ratio mattered enormously for final flavor. Too much ginger created burning sensations that made eyes water. Too little produced bland, disappointing cookies that tasted nothing like proper ginger snaps should. The dough rolled into marble-sized balls that rolled in granulated sugar before baking, creating sparkly coating that added textural interest and visual appeal that made plain cookies look fancy. Each cookie spread slightly during baking in hot ovens, developing characteristic cracks across tops that signaled proper texture developing underneath surface. The true test came after cooling completely on wire racks. Proper ginger snaps broke cleanly when bent in half, producing audible snap that gave cookies their name and proved bakers' skill. Soft ginger snaps were imposters and frauds, calling themselves ginger snaps, while lacking essential crispness that defined authentic versions that grandmothers made. One batch produced 100 cookies that lasted months when stored in airtight tins, away from humidity, maintaining snap indefinitely if protected from moisture that ruined texture instantly. Children dunked them in cold milk, softening cookies slightly before eating, while creating afternoon rituals around cookie consumption that defined childhood memories. Factory workers carried them in metal lunchboxes wrapped in cloth napkins, eating them during coffee breaks that punctuated long shifts on assembly lines. Soldiers received them in care packages from families back home because they survived shipping without crumbling and lasted weeks without spoiling in transit. The school fundraisers sold them by the dozen, wrapped in wax paper, marketed as traditional favorites that appealed across age groups from children to elderly. The spice combination provided warmth perfect for cold weather months, making them autumn and winter staples rather than year-round cookies families baked constantly. Church potlucks featured them on cookie platters, where they provided spicy contrast to sweeter vanilla and chocolate options that dominated most dessert tables. Holiday cookie exchanges included them as reliable classics that never disappointed recipients expecting familiar flavors without surprises or exotic ingredients. Stovetop cooking eliminated ovens completely from cookie making when no-bake chocolate oatmeal cookies revolutionized summer baking and saved American housewives from heat torture. These cost 7 pennies per batch using cocoa powder, sugar, butter, milk, vanilla, oats, and peanut butter boiled together, then dropped onto wax paper, where they hardened without refrigeration. The no-bake aspect meant houses stayed cool during brutal summer heat waves, when turning on ovens became unbearable torture that transformed kitchens into saunas and made cooking miserable. Housewives boiled sugar, butter, milk, and cocoa exactly 1 minute after reaching full rolling boil. Timing mattered critically because undercooked mixture never hardened properly. Overcooked mixture turned grainy and unpleasant tasting. Removing pot from heat immediately after timing, they stirred in vanilla, peanut butter, and oats quickly before mixture cooled and stiffened into unworkable paste. Working fast with 2 spoons, they dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper spread across countertops where cookies hardened within 20 minutes, without refrigeration or additional steps. Each cookie measured 3 inches across with fudgy texture between candy and cookie, satisfying intense chocolate cravings without oven heat or complicated techniques. Children watched boiling process with fascination from safe distances, learning candy-making principles through cookie production that taught kitchen science. The wax paper prevented sticking without greasing pans or using parchment paper, simplifying cleanup that usually plagued cookie baking and created mountains of dishes. Summer church socials featured them prominently because bakers avoided heating kitchens during brutal Midwestern heat waves before air conditioning became standard household equipment. The chocolate-peanut butter combination appealed universally to people who loved Reese's Cups but couldn't afford candy bars regularly on tight household budgets. Teenagers made them independently because stovetop cooking seemed more mature than oven baking, and boiling sugar felt like chemistry experiments rather than childish activities. Buttery balls rolled in powdered sugar became Russian tea cakes that melted in mouths before chewing became necessary or even possible. These cost 9 pennies per batch, using butter, powdered sugar, vanilla, flour, and finely chopped pecans mixed into tender dough that required gentle handling. The name confused everyone because nothing about them seemed Russian. Some families called them Mexican wedding cookies. Others knew them as snowballs, each region claiming different origins for identical recipes that tasted the same everywhere. The butter content created extraordinary richness that distinguished them from ordinary cookies. Nearly half the dough consisted of butter that melted in mouths instantly upon contact with warm tongues. Pecans required fine chopping that took patience and sharp knives or manual nut choppers, but coarse chunks ruined delicate texture these cookies demanded for proper melting quality. Dough rolled into walnut-sized balls, placed on ungreased baking sheets, baked until barely set but not browned, remaining pale throughout baking. While still warm from ovens, cookies rolled carefully in powdered sugar that stuck to buttery surfaces and created thick white coating that looked like snow. After cooling completely to room temperature, they rolled again in powdered sugar to reinforce coating that would survive storage and handling without rubbing off. Each cookie measured 1.5 inches across, bite-sized perfection that disappeared in single mouthfuls and left people reaching for more immediately. One batch produced 6 dozen cookies that stored for weeks in airtight containers, where powdered sugar coating remained intact and protected tender interiors. Holiday cookie exchanges featured them as premium offerings because butter and pecan costs exceeded ordinary cookie ingredients significantly and demonstrated baker generosity. Wedding receptions served them on silver platters where their white coating symbolized bridal purity and new beginnings appropriately for marriage celebrations. Grandmothers wrapped them individually in tissue paper for gift-giving during holidays, presenting them in decorative tins that recipients returned next Christmas for refilling with fresh batches. The melt-in-mouth texture required proper butter ratios that took experience to achieve. Too little meant dry, crumbly cookies. Too much created greasy disasters that fell apart. Pressing thumbs into cookie dough created wells for jam, when thumbprint cookies combined simple butter cookies with colorful fruit preserves beautifully. These cost 8 pennies per batch, using butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, flour, and jam, in simple combinations that produced elegant results, impressing guests. The pressing required gentle firmness that took practice. Too light meant shallow wells that disappeared during baking when dough spread. Too hard meant squashed cookies instead of proper rounds with centers intact. Each cookie baked 10 minutes in moderate ovens until edges barely browned, while centers remained pale and soft. Then jam spooned carefully into still warm wells using small spoons. The jam choices varied by season and availability: strawberry in summer months, raspberry in fall, apricot in winter. Results always impressed guests expecting ordinary cookies from home bakers. One batch produced 5 dozen cookies that stored well for days, if jam stayed contained within wells, rather than spreading across cookie surfaces and making messes. Children loved pressing thumbs into soft dough, turning baking into participatory activity, or even young kids contributed meaningfully to final results and felt accomplished. The jam addition transformed plain butter cookies into sophisticated confections, appropriate for fancy afternoon teas and holiday gatherings that required special treats. School bake sales featured them as premium offerings because appearance suggested bakery quality despite home origins and amateur baker skills. Holiday cookie exchanges valued them highly because multiple jam colors created rainbow platters that showcased variety and demonstrated effort beyond simple single-batch cookies. Wedding showers served them arranged by color in geometric patterns across silver trays that matched wedding color schemes perfectly. The cookies required minimal decoration beyond jam centers, saving time compared to frosted or elaborately decorated alternatives that demanded artistic skills. 25 penny cookies revealed 5 more waiting in forgotten recipe boxes. The final batch includes cookies Americans still recognize but rarely bake anymore from scratch. Number 27 cracks dramatically across tops. Number 28 combines oats with raisins. Number 30 costs pennies, but satisfies like expensive bakery confections. Hershey's Kisses pressed into warm peanut butter cookies created blossoms that combined 2 beloved American flavors into single perfect bites. These cost 11 pennies per batch because chocolate kisses increased expenses beyond ordinary cookie ingredients that most families kept stocked. The recipe appeared on Hershey's Kiss packages starting in the 1950s during marketing campaigns, spreading across America as housewives discovered the combination that seemed invented by marketing genius understanding flavor psychology. Peanut butter, sugar, brown sugar, shortening, eggs, vanilla, flour, and baking soda mixed into soft dough that rolled into balls and rolled again in granulated sugar before baking on ungreased sheets. Each cookie baked 8 minutes in hot ovens until barely set but not browned. Then immediately after removing from ovens, unwrapped kisses pressed firmly into centers while cookies remained hot enough to soften slightly, allowing chocolate to nestle into cookie tops perfectly. The pressing required speed and coordination. Cookies hardened quickly after leaving ovens, making kiss insertion difficult on cooled cookies that cracked under pressure or refused to accept chocolate. One batch produced 4 dozen cookies that combined peanut butter and chocolate in perfect proportions that satisfied both cravings simultaneously, without overwhelming either flavor. Children unwrapped kisses during baking process, eating 1 chocolate for every 3 unwrapped successfully, creating disappearing kiss problems that required extra bags purchased specifically for theft. The sugar rolling created sparkly coating that contrasted beautifully with dark chocolate tops and shiny foil wrapping, making cookies visually appealing beyond taste considerations alone. Holiday cookie exchanges featured them as crowd favorites that disappeared first from platters before other cookies received attention from guests making selections. School bake sales sold them at premium prices because chocolate edition justified higher costs than plain cookies. without expensive ingredients adding value. The cookies required planning ahead to purchase sufficient kiss quantities from stores. Running out mid-batch meant plain peanut butter cookies instead of spectacular blossoms that children expected. Brownie cookies, rolled in powdered sugar, created crinkles with dramatic black and white appearance that looked professionally decorated without effort. These cost 10 pennies per batch, using cocoa powder, vegetable oil, sugar, eggs, vanilla, flour, and baking powder mixed into sticky chocolate dough that stained hands. The dough required overnight refrigeration that made it manageable for rolling. Warm dough stuck to everything, including fingers and countertops. Cold dough rolled smoothly into uniform balls without mess. Each ball rolled thoroughly in powdered sugar until completely coated white, without dark spots showing through coating, then placed on greased baking sheets where they baked 12 minutes at 350 degrees exactly. During baking process, cookies spread outward and cracked naturally, creating fissures where dark chocolate dough broke through white powdered sugar coating dramatically, producing stunning contrast that made cookies look professionally decorated by bakery experts. The cracking required proper oven temperature maintained consistently. Too hot meant burning edges before centers cooked. Too cool meant insufficient cracking that left cookies looking plain and disappointing. Each cookie measured 3 inches across, after spreading with fudgy centers and slightly crispy edges that provided textural contrast between interior and exterior. One batch produced 4 dozen cookies that stayed soft for days when stored in airtight containers, away from air that dried them. The brownie-like texture appealed strongly to people who loved chocolate intensely and wanted cookies that satisfied serious chocolate cravings without compromise. Children loved the black and white appearance that seemed magical compared to boring, solid-colored cookies that looked plain and uninteresting by comparison. Holiday cookie platters featured them prominently as chocolate representation among vanilla and spice alternatives that dominated most cookie selections traditionally. The powdered sugar coating made them appropriate for fancy occasions, despite simple ingredients and techniques that required no special skills. School fundraisers sold them marketed specifically as fancy chocolate cookies that justified premium pricing above ordinary cookies without decoration. Chewy oats studded with plump raisins created oatmeal raisin cookies that divided people into devoted fans or complete avoiders with no middle ground. These cost 6 pennies per batch, using rolled oats, flour, brown sugar, butter, eggs, vanilla, cinnamon, baking soda, and raisins in combinations that produced America's second most popular cookie after chocolate chip dominated everything. The oats provided hearty texture and fiber content that made cookies feel wholesome enough to justify eating for breakfast when time pressures eliminated proper morning meals. Raisins added natural sweetness and chewy texture that complemented oat crunchiness perfectly when baked correctly without burning fruit. Each cookie spread during baking into 3-inch rounds with slightly crispy edges and soft centers that stayed chewy for days without hardening. One batch produced 6 dozen cookies that disappeared quickly from cookie jars despite polarizing nature. People either loved or hated raisin cookies passionately, with no middle ground existing between extremes. Children bit into them, expecting chocolate chips after visual confusion, discovering raisins instead, creating bitter disappointment that turned some kids against raisins forever in all foods. The cinnamon addition provided warmth that made cookies taste like autumn, regardless of actual season when they were baked and consumed. Housewives made them year-round because ingredients cost pennies, and oats stretched dough further than flour alone could manage economically. School lunchboxes carried them wrapped in wax paper alongside sandwiches, providing afternoon energy that sustained children through long school days and sports practices. Distinguished snickerdoodles from plain sugar cookies through simple but highly effective technique that transformed basic dough. These cost 5 pennies per batch, using butter, sugar, eggs, vanilla, flour, cream of tartar, baking soda, and cinnamon mixed into soft dough that rolled easily into balls. The cream of tartar created distinctive tangy flavor that separated these completely from ordinary sugar cookies, while also producing characteristic cracked surface texture during baking. Each ball rolled thoroughly in cinnamon sugar mixture before baking, coating cookies completely in sweet spice that caramelized slightly during baking and created flavor depth. Cookies spread into 3-inch rounds with crackled tops and soft centers that stayed tender for days in covered containers. One batch produced 5 dozen cookies that disappeared faster than plain sugar cookies because cinnamon addition elevated basic recipe into something special and interesting. The name confused everyone who heard it. Nobody knew its origin or meaning, with theories ranging from German words to New England nonsense language invented by children. But everyone agreed the cookies tasted delicious, regardless of etymology mysteries. Children loved rolling dough balls in cinnamon sugar mixtures, creating participation opportunities during baking sessions that made them feel helpful and accomplished. Fork-pressed crosshatch patterns identified peanut butter cookies instantly before tasting, revealed familiar flavor everyone recognized immediately. These cost 6 pennies per batch, using peanut butter, sugar, brown sugar, shortening, eggs, vanilla, flour, and baking soda in straightforward combinations that produced consistently reliable results every time. Dough rolled into walnut-sized balls placed on ungreased sheets with 2-inch spacing, and fork tines pressed twice in perpendicular directions, creating distinctive crosshatch patterns that flattened balls slightly and left decorative marks. The fork pressing served both practical and aesthetic purposes. Flattening encouraged even baking throughout cookies, while creating visual signature that identified cookies instantly from across rooms. Each cookie baked 10 minutes in moderate ovens until edges barely browned, centers remained soft and slightly underdone-looking, emerging with crispy edges and chewy centers after cooling. The peanut butter flavor intensified dramatically during baking, filling entire kitchens with nutty aroma, announced cookies to entire neighborhoods, and made mouths water. One batch produced 7 dozen cookies that stored for weeks in airtight containers, without losing moisture or flavor intensity over time. Children ate them with cold milk after school, creating classic American combination that defined childhoods across decades and generations. School lunchboxes carried them wrapped individually in wax paper, providing protein and satisfaction, sustained energy through long afternoons of classes and activities. The cookies required no special ingredients beyond peanut butter that most families kept stocked for sandwich-making purposes anyway in pantries. Depression mothers made them because peanut butter cost less than butter and provided protein that made cookies marginally nutritious compared to pure sugar alternatives. Factory workers carried them in metal lunchboxes to assembly lines, eating them during coffee breaks that punctuated industrial shifts and long workdays. Church fundraisers sold them by the dozen, wrapped in cellophane, marketed as childhood favorites that appealed across generations, from toddlers to elderly. Holiday cookie exchanges included them as nostalgic classics that everyone recognized and appreciated despite simple appearance without fancy decoration or elaborate techniques. Some families pressed chocolate kiss candies into centers immediately after baking, creating peanut butter blossoms that transformed basic cookies into special occasions requiring unwrapped chocolates. Between 1950 and 1990, 30 cookie recipes disappeared without saying goodbye. Forgotten cookies, sand tarts, pfeffernuss, curabiedes, Anzac biscuits. These weren't fancy imports. They were penny cookies, costing under 10 cents per batch, fed families through depression and war. Convenience killed them. By 1980, refrigerated dough tubes lined shelves. Break and bake eliminated measuring cups. Pre-made dough meant cookies without effort or skill. Recipes became artifacts. Cookbooks gathered dust at estate sales. Index cards yellowed in drawers. Women who memorized recipes died without teaching daughters who chose careers over kitchens. They were left with substitutes. Russian tea cakes became frozen snowballs. Thumbprints got mass-produced with artificial jam. Ginger snaps went soft when America decided cookies shouldn't snap anymore. The originals, costing pennies, filling jars for weeks, surviving months in tins, exist only in memory. Today's bakers pay $5 per cookie for vintage-inspired treats, costing 30 cents to produce. Food bloggers rediscover recipes that were just ignored. We've monetized nostalgia for an era when thrift meant survival, not aesthetic. These 30 cookies aren't returning. The world that created them, large families, tight budgets, Sunday baking marathons, church cookie exchanges, vanished completely. We can resurrect recipes, but not the necessity that made them matter.